The Able to Care podcast is sponsored by Able Training Support Limited, who build partnerships with organisations to develop confidence and competence in their team to promote positive outcomes for all. Find the link in the description. So welcome to today's podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the subject of what's called social pedagogy, which is, if you read it, it's harder to say than you might think. Okay, it's definitely a tongue twister. I came across the principle or the theory of this 3P model when developing some courses for a number of customers, particularly around professional boundaries and also improving practice. We originally got contacted by one of my customers, who is a foster care agency, and they were looking for a course to improve practice in long-term fostering. So I think one of the things within any job, there is always a risk of becoming slightly complacent, falling into patterns of behavior, and not always remembering to act at your most professional self. I think we're all guilty of that, maybe at certain points in a day or certain points in time in any job we've done. I think there is certain roles, and foster care or foster parents being one of them, that there is such this kind of connection between being a parent, a biological parent, and then what they're doing for a living. And I think those lines can be very easily blurred. If you're living with somebody in your household and they've been in your household for 13 years, maintaining your professional kind of views may be more difficult. But as I was developing this course for the foster agency, I kind of felt there was some real bits in here that would be useful for anybody who is in the role of caregiver, or parents as well, and teachers and the rest. I think it's a really good principle to try and utilize on a day-to-day basis. I think it's an aspect of maintaining professional boundaries, but it's also about how would we put it? Reducing conflict, improving relationships, just improving outcomes generally, which is, as you know, sort of one of the things that Able to Care and Able Training Support Limited, we kind of focus on that, the improving outcomes for all. Okay, those that we care for, those that we look after, but also ourselves as well, and the people who do the caring side, the teaching, the whatever it is. So let me just start off with what the 3Ps are. So the 3Ps model basically is referring to our professional self, our personal self, and also our private selves. So first off, the professional self is that professional part of ourselves that relates to our responsibilities, our knowledge, and our skills. And it connects us with the role that we're undertaking. So it provides us with this kind of professional framework that can help us guide through how we interact with others, but also on the decisions we make in whatever we're doing. So the professional part of ourselves, if we put it into a kind of a caregiver role, so if it's a foster carer, it's, attending meetings and trainings, it's, going to panel, it's engaging with the other professionals and social workers. There's going to be this professional requirement. Like myself as a professional, if I was turning up to a training course, I don't tend to train up to a training course in like joggers and t-shirt. So I tend to wear shirt and trousers because there is this kind of expectation. I want you to take me seriously. I want you to recognize me as a professional because I'm taking this seriously. So therefore we should be listening to each other. It's also things like turning up on time and meeting expectations, communicating, and kind of everything we do. There's a professionalism to it, okay? If we take it away from the kind of foster care and move it into, I think, even parents, there's many parents I spoke to, and we've done some podcasts with some parents of children who've needed that additional support. And I think there's a big thing of, turning up at school if you are fighting your corner or you are concerned about something for your child. Like, how are you presenting yourself? Are you presenting yourself, in a joggers and t-shirt, I've just stepped out? Or is it a case of, look, you need to listen to me because I'm professional? And I completely understand that may feel you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but we're human beings. We do. We do make a judgment. There's the principle of first impressions, that we make a judgment on somebody within the first 15 milliseconds of meeting them. Now, obviously that first impression can be massively incorrect. And I'm sure many of you out there have met somebody and that first impression was, I don't think they're my kind of person, but but now they're your best friend. Whereas you might have another person that, that first 15 seconds you thought, oh, I think they're really my kind of person. And now you actively avoid them in the street. So we all know that first impression could be wrong, but we can't help sometimes falling for them. So the professional self is that, how do you want to be perceived? And I think whether you are a paid or an unpaid caregiver, if any time you are representing another person or you are looking out for the well-being of another person, I think there has to be that, please take me seriously because this matters. However, let's go into what we call the personal self. So the personal self is a little bit different, okay? The personal self is who you are. It's how we engage with a person in a way that feels authentically you. So if you take, for instance, so if any of you out there were to meet me on a night out, for instance, you would meet a slightly different Andy to the Andy you're seeing on the podcast and the Andy you're seeing in a training session. Not because I'm being false, it's just a slightly different hat, okay? I think it'd be very odd if I was doing a podcast and kind of slurring my words and, I'd had a few too many, for instance. So my professional self kind of adjusts itself based on the role I'm undertaking, who I'm talking to, the knowledge and the skills. It's all my background, my understanding of the law, my understanding of human behavior. Your personal self is my personality that I add into that. Because when we are being professional, it's not about being false. It is a case of, training courses, to be fair, I probably tame my swearing a little bit, but I did start swearing a little bit more on because one, I just wanted to be authentic. Like I swear in real life because when I'm passionate, I tend to swear. So when I'm talking about a subject that I'm passionate about, I may swear. I'm sure there's certain circumstances that wouldn't be appropriate, and there's certain training settings that I go to where I recognize that's not appropriate. But I still try and always bring in my personality of who I am as a person, because people like people. We don't want to be a robot. And I think the blend of the personal and the professional can really allows us to build rapport, allows us to build connection, but also be taken seriously and seen as assertive and formidable. So what's the last P? Well, the last P is the private self. The private self is the part of ourselves that, we wouldn't let others see necessarily, or certain people we wouldn't let them see. I wouldn't. There's certain behaviors or certain communication or certain thoughts I might have that I wouldn't then utter or, make mention of within certain contexts and roles. Now, I'm sure many of you are kind of familiar with this, and maybe it feels like a common sense kind of approach, though many of you who may have interacted before know I don't personally believe in common sense. But I think it's worthwhile kind of just being very mindful of, because I think that's where, let's say that I am caring for an elderly relative, for instance. I'm now starting to deal with social workers. I'm now starting to deal with, medical professionals and things like that. Now, it's not a case of it's not being me, because I want me to come over in the passion, in the fact how much it matters to me and that this is important. But at the same time, am I just being perceived by the professionals as, well, they're just an overly emotional family member? And there's a big difference, isn't there? That am I just an overly emotional family member, or am I somebody who's presenting themselves professionally to go, look, you need to listen to me because I do know my stuff. Okay. And I know there's many parents out there, many caregivers out there that once they find out, about their child's needs or, their loved one's additional needs, they research it, they learn about it, and they're living with it, they understand it. So they've got a perspective that is so important and so vital that other professionals do need to hear, do need to be mindful of, do need to be considerate of. But how are we presenting that information over? Are we shouting and screaming, or are we engaging in that kind of professional tone? So hopefully that makes sense so far, those three different elements. So one of the kind of the exercises I sometimes do is, well, what different scenarios? So let's say I'm emailing a professional, for instance, whether it be I'm emailing a teacher or I'm emailing a social worker or whoever it is that I'm kind of emailing. Like, how am I setting my email out? Am I setting it professionally, or I'm just kind of like I'm messaging a mate down the pub kind of thing, or messaging a friend? So it's then, how am I putting my actual written communication together? It could be about when we're meeting people, either at our own home or whether we're going somewhere else to potentially meet. And also, obviously, the engagement we have with those professionals, how we introduce ourselves, how we dress, how we kind of present, whether we go with pre-information or whether we just turn out and wing it a little bit. So I think there was when I was putting this together, there was a quote that I came across. It was a kind of real life scenario case study from a particular foster carer in this particular circumstance. So, and I quite like it. And so we'll just kind of read through it and see how we go. So there are many times in a professional relationship where you need to bring heat and they need to know that you are serious. I think it's really important that all foster carers both understand that they themselves are professionals who need to be taken seriously, but they also need to understand that the professionals they're talking to are human beings and nothing's going to get done if we just come with fire and heat in our relationship all the time. There are times where I need to have that serious conversation. I need to remind them that it's not personal, but we need to talk about that. I don't personally believe that negates being hospitable and making sure that they're comfortable in my home and that I respect the fact that this is my home. This is not an office space. This is my young person's home. This is their safe space and I need them to treat it thusly. That's from a foster carer. So as I said, I think that's really nicely put together and it blends that balance, or it blends those two ideas, doesn't it, as kind of the professionalism, but also the personable. I'm going to treat you as a human being. I also understand that you're a human too. You have bad days. You've got a lot of pressure on you, but at the same time, you need to listen to me. You need to take me seriously. I think that's a nice kind of description of that. If we kind of thinking about some tips, so how can we kind of do this within everyday life, within our roles as being a caregiver or, say, whatever our situation is? So one is doing things like prioritizing times that are best for the person you're supporting. So those of you who are, whether you're an advocate of the person you're caring for as a paid carer, or whether you are supporting a loved one as you're an unpaid carer, whether you are a parent looking out for the best interests of your child, or a foster parent looking after the best interests of your child. Whichever the circumstance is, I think it's recognizing when suits best. And I'm either going to put in, even if you're a teacher who's looking after the children in your classroom and maybe another professional wants to engage with that child. I think one of the things that I try and draw attention to within for children who come from are in looked after children is that they want to be treated normally, but then they take them out of lessons all the time, and that's not always normal. So where's the balance there? So I think prioritizing times, knowing, so you're working on behalf of the person you're caring for, you're the advocate for them, and therefore you are kind of managing that situation, but always looking at it from their best interests within that scenario. But I think the also important part is sharing perspectives. So listening, negotiating with the other side. I think it's very easy when I'm teaching certain courses. I think it can be very easy. You've got two professionals, let's say as a teacher and there is a parent, or let's say as a social worker and a foster carer, or a social worker and an unpaid caregiver. That sometimes I've seen like we're battling for two different things. I think what's worth considering is that most of the time we are usually looking for the best interests of the person that we are supporting, whether that be, let's say, a social worker and a foster carer, for instance, or a social worker and a parent. Both are usually looking for the best interests of the child. Now, they may be approaching it from completely different points of view. They maybe have completely different ways of what they think are the best interests or what they think is right or wrong. However, the commonality, the shared value is that they're both working with the best interests of the individual in mind. Now, I'm sure many of you out there probably feel like kind of shouting from the rooftops. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And I know there is always going to be exceptions to that rule where sometimes other things seem to be being put as priority rather than the individual that we care most about. And I completely understand that. And that is a frustrating and challenging situation. But I think, considering those other people's roles as well, that, well, is it them or is it the pressure being put on them from others? Is this teacher not doing the best interest of my child because they don't care, or because there is pressure from others that the teacher is trying to have to jostle, or social worker, or insert any other professional within that kind of situation? We all know what bosses can be like, or pressure from external settings can be like. That again, it's not personal. Can't remember where I heard this, but recently I heard somebody sort of said like it's not personal. And then we were kind of talking, but nothing is personal. Absolutely nothing. If you ever feel it's personal, it's still not, because it's usually about what's going on for the other person rather than what's going on with you, which I found quite interesting. And I'm sure, again, there's maybe exceptions to that rule, and sometimes it is personal, but hey, I'll give them the benefit of doubt wherever I can. So I think it is worth considering other people's roles and workloads, but also their humanity. You know, we all know we can be a little less patient when we're tired. The thing is, when I'm teaching a lot about de-escalation and behavior management and stuff, we can't always control other people's behavior. There's only one person's behavior that we have a hope of controlling, and even that's hard at times, but it is ourselves. And the way that we behave, you know, does have a huge impact as far as the reactions and impact on others. You know, the attitude and behavior cycle, or secure base modeling, a lot of them refer to it. You know, my thoughts and feelings affect my behavior, which then impact on yours. So I think recognizing, even if you've got a person who's in a bad mood, then it's definitely kind of worthwhile. Okay, maybe there's stuff going on for them. I think as well, kind of following good kind of conflict management strategies as well. You know, it's easy to fall into you didn't do this, you never do this, you should do this. So I might do another podcast on this sometime, but looking at kind of assertive communication, I think is definitely worthwhile developing a habit in. There's a big difference between being passive, assertive, and aggressive. You know, aggressive is do as I say, or don't you talk to me like that. Passive is just letting them do whatever they want or not standing up for yourself. Whereas assertive is kind of recognizing your rights, but also recognizing that other people have rights too. And it's finding that balance between that kind of communication, that circumstance, you know. I'll just kind of finish off. I think do a bit of a scenario, for instance, and hopefully some of you can relate to this, or you can map it over to different circumstances as far as how we interact. And obviously we'll cover in other podcasts things like body language and communication and all the stuff that I love talking about. But let's say we've got a scenario then. That a social worker would like to meet you. You usually work till 6 p.m. on this particular day, but you take this time off to attend this particular meeting that they've arranged for 4 p.m. The social worker then turns up an hour late. Okay, so how might you feel, and how could this situation be managed? Thinking particularly around that 3P model that we've been talking about. So the professional self, the personal self, and the private self. Now the private self might be, I just want to tell them to go away, to go F themselves or whatever. Okay, but hopefully the professional and the personal self are going to kind of kick in. So maybe we could communicate in this way. Look, I appreciate as a social worker that you don't want to be meeting at 6 p.m. As that would take away from your family time. However, I need you to know that I left work early to be here for this meeting. So when you were late, that impacts me. Also, I still need to cook dinner, and my children still need their attention from me as well. So there's a 2 impact thing going on here. Look, in the future, if lateness cannot be avoided, which I completely understand, please can we either reschedule or at least give me the choice first? So hopefully you kind of get from that example, it's still going, look, I know it's not you. I know it's not because you're a bad person, but these are things that I find frustrating or made it difficult for me. Please understand my point of view, although I understand yours. So could we do it differently? And then they're setting that clear boundary. No anger, no aggression, just a clear boundary, your expectations. Okay. If you did find today useful, please like, share, subscribe, follow, make comment, whatever you need to do. It'd be great to hear from you. Otherwise, thank you very much.